Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Dolores Tarver. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Georgia, and it is time for the TT Time with Dr. Tarver is a wellness-based podcast. It is not intended to be a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health provider. This is the last full week of April, and I gotta tell you, I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed. There's just so many things I wanted to cover this month, so many different awareness opportunities for the month. I've gotten to the Black Maternal Health, the minority health, stress awareness, counseling awareness, but there's alcohol awareness and sexual assault and prevention and autism. Like, there's just so many things that I want to be able to get to. And so I really had to run it back to some of the stress awareness and counseling awareness techniques I shared to remind myself, as well as follow my therapist recommendations to just be able to be kind to myself and be thoughtful and intentional about what's realistic, to give myself grace, and to just take a breath. So I was wondering, like, why am I feeling so much of this kind of high energy to touch on so many things? And I will say that April has just been, I think, a challenging month for a lot of people. If you have been following the news, even in my local area, there's been a lot of death, particularly young people. Even we're currently in the midst of a trial of a young child who was essentially pimped out for money for drugs from her mom. I think that's been just hard on our community. We've also, in this prom season, seen young people lose their lives. It's always difficult for us, I think, when children are victimized, particularly the wrong place, wrong time kind of scenarios, because we think our young people ought to be able to be safe no matter where they are. But I think one of the most challenging things that I heard was last week. I was listening to a podcast and was absolutely horrified as women who have been formerly incarcerated at a women's correctional facility in California. This facility is dubbed the Rape Club. Shared experiences of powerlessness, abuse, exploitation, coercion, manipulation, and retaliation when they did speak up, just to name some of the things. And these were all at the hands of staff of the prison. One, that prison could be dubbed a rape club. That set so heavy in my spirit. But to listen to these women talk about how their lives have been forever altered, just how they were treated so inhumanely, and how they felt as if they did not have a voice. And even if they had one, that it fell on deaf ears. I don't ever want to get to a point where I feel numb to all of the horrific and gruesome things that people experience in life. I don't want to ever get to a place where I am no longer able to be empathic. So I needed to grieve, I think, for my sisters who are still being tortured and haunted by not only how the law failed them, actually before, during, and also after the time of their incarceration, but also in this journey to wellness, how many other people were impacted by what happened to them, their children, their families, their communities, because this doesn't just affect a woman, and that's enough. It doesn't have to be that she's not enough for what her experience was to matter, but just the layers of it also just speak to how a single act or several acts toward one person can have detrimental effects for generations to come. This particular facility had been under investigation for so long that here recently a federal judge had appointed a special master to oversee the prison. Now, it has since been decided that this prison just is beyond repair and it is going to be closed. Um, but then, of course, that begs the question, where are these employees going to go, and are some of them still engaging in these behaviors? Some of these things happened prior to the current employees being there, but when you have a culture like that, how do you ever get to a place where you fully address that? Are we just going to disperse women to other places and not really attend to the issues that are facing? There's only actually six women only federal prisons, and this was one of them. This is Dublin, FCI Dublin, in California. But in addition to the sexual abuse that occurred there, the mental manipulation, the coercion, um, the retaliation, there also was mold, hazardous mold, asbestos, and inadequate health care to women who were incarcerated. So, kind of systemically, we're seeing all of these issues. And this isn't just limited. I don't want people to feel like this is just limited to this particular prison. But in this episode, I did want to address our sisters who are incarcerated because I think they often don't get a chance to have a voice, or again, their voices are muted or attempted to be muted as we address Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month. So, even if this isn't an area where you feel like, oh, I need to listen to this, I would encourage you to do so, because, truth be told, you or someone you know, someone maybe you even you love or care about, has a lot of risk factors that could put them in a position where they're either falsely accused and incarcerated or are dealing with the effects of someone being incarcerated. So I don't want us to turn a deaf ear or a blind eye when we start talking about women who have been incarcerated because we feel like, oh, well, they did something and they deserve that. First of all, that's not true. And the majority of women are nonviolent offenders. However, their prison sentences are often severely harsh. And in addition to that, we have women who are in jail, even if they haven't been charged or convicted, right? So they're just in processes of waiting in facilities. So I want us not to get desensitized, and I want us to humanize people, see them as women first. So let's understand a few things, right? So this is awareness and prevention. So the Marshall Project outlines that a large proportion of women who are incarcerated are mothers. About 60% of women in state prisons have children who are under the age of 18. 60%. According to the Prison Policy Initiative, 190,600 women and girls are incarcerated in the United States on any given day, locked up, whether that's a jail or a prison. 93,000 women are held in jails, with only 51,000 of them, or I should say the majority, I shouldn't say only, the majority of which, 51,000, have not even been convicted of a crime. 51,000 have not been convicted of a crime, which is why it's so important that we don't just tune out because this isn't your experience right now. Because this may be an experience or the experience again of someone you love and care about. Correctional facilities not only have the capacity to limit, but they can also charge money for basic necessities like tampons and pads. Menstrual cycles, a normal biological process for women, and they're having to pay for or not have enough to be able to have healthy hygiene to change their tampons and pads regularly. Women are more likely to be sexually assaulted while they're incarcerated, and the primary offender of that sexual assault is correctional staff. Women often are limited to be able to have contact with their families, particularly their children. Most correctional facilities limit physical contact, so there's not a lot of touch or there's limited touch when people are able to visit. And Visits and calls are costly. So if I'm already not receiving adequate health care products that I need, and so families are having to send in resources so I can be able to get what I need, then that means they may not have the opportunity to have money for visits or calls or their own basic needs to take care of children back home. Um, these women could have been caregivers for aging parents, and so now we have caregivers missing in the home. And then we're also dealing with their own health care, right? Because oftentimes healthcare in facilities are not adequate. Um, Mental health, substance abuse, chronic illness, those tend to be the things that are often not addressed in the ways that they need to be. And so we're getting whatever's available, whatever's cheap. We know that there are shortages of a lot of things and staff. So imagine what that jail and prison facility looks like. We also know that often are incarcerated and jailed, for that matter. Women are not receiving any wages. Those that are, they're subpar wages, which are often not enough for them to be able to buy their basic needs, much less be able to support their families, to support their children. And we also recognize that girls of color and those who identify as LGBTQ plus are disproportionately confined by the juvenile justice system. Black girls accounting for 32% of all girls in juvenile facilities, even though they make up only 14% of girls under 18 nationwide. 32% of all girls in juvenile facilities are black. 40% of girls in the juvenile justice system are lesbian, bisexual, questioning, or gender nonconforming. 40%. And because there are often fewer female staff who work in correctional facilities, we have males who are in roles where they're watching our girls and women, when they can use the bathroom, how they use the bathroom, changing clothes. Now, there are supposed to be limits for cross gender supervision, which is men guarding women or women guarding men. However, it continues to happen, which is what's leading to opportunities for women to be violated and our girls to be violated in juvenile justice facilities as well. About half of the women coming into prison or jail have already been victims of sexual abuse. And females tend to be the victims in one third of all sexual abuse cases committed by prison staff. One third, even though they make up only 7% of the prison population. 65 million Americans have a criminal record. What does that mean? Restrictions in employment, education, housing. Of that 65 million, 808,700 women are on probation or parole and are forced to live under a complex set of rules and restrictions that often set them up to fail and lead them right back to being incarcerated. According to the Women's Prison Association, poverty is the biggest predictor of whether or not a woman will re enter the criminal legal system. Let me say that again, poverty, because I think sometimes we forget how close we could be to poverty. Significant illness, job loss, any number of factors. Most people are a paycheck away from poverty, and the other people are only three paychecks away. So, what are some of the effects of our women being incarcerated who have experienced trauma? What we know is that when women are sexually abused and assaulted, they often have limited self efficacy. It is hard to negotiate any kind of boundaries when your boundaries have been violated. That may be sexual relationships moving forward, that could be substance abuse, that could be whether or not you engage in protective mechanisms when having sex, that could be you negotiating your preventative care in terms of you being able to get on birth control as you're talking with sexual partners. And so that can end up being an indication of potential for additional abuse, potential for additional children, potential for substance abuse. And I think that we underscore the importance of power dynamics and what happens when power dynamics intersect with inequality, race, ethnicity, social class, sexual orientation, right? And so when we don't have power, then it affects our self worth, but it also affects our ability to trust decisions that we make and also be able to make good decisions, because what we know is we tend to reperpetuate trauma environments in our lives because we begin to believe that this is my existence. I don't truly have body autonomy. I don't truly have the any kind of power. I don't truly have a voice. I don't truly have the ability to be able to have a good home. I don't have the ability to be able to take care of my children. I don't have the ability to be able to work. This is the life I'm doomed to. And because I'm doomed to this life, then I have to accept whatever comes along with that. There was an article I read where women were talking about using substances oftentimes to numb and cope and deal with underlying mental health issues, trauma. And what they said is when you accept using substances, particularly when you're using substances in order to have someone in your life who can help protect you or give you shelter or offer you some types of resources, because again, poverty is the biggest predictor of women getting reincarcerated, then you have to accept the type of man that you're going to be dealing with in this substance use. And I think that we also recognize that anytime we already have kind of negative experiences, they shape our core beliefs. You'll hear me talk about the core beliefs quite frequently. That's gender roles, the autonomy, the ability, our ability to trust, have unconditional love, be able to achieve things, be successful. But also because now that has affected my family unit, now I'm also passing that on to children. And we also know for women who are incarcerated while they're pregnant and end up having children, we know that we pass trauma down literally cellularly in our bodies when we have children. And so we're thinking about the generations and the cycles that are being affected by this. So, what do we do with this, Tarver? There isn't any one answer, as most things are complicated, but I do think it's important as we bring awareness to sexual assault of women who are incarcerated, who have been incarcerated, and we move toward prevention and intervention kind of resources, or we support the existing ones. Positive programming, right? There are alternatives to prison. Remember, the majority of women are non-violent offenders. So there are programs where we can keep women with their children and we ensure that they're safe. We ensure that they have housing. We ensure that they have basic needs met, that they have food, that they have clothing, that they're able to have menstrual supplies, that they have culturally responsive and inclusive health care, including their mental health, substance abuse treatment, that they get parenting skills, that they have life skills, apprenticeships, mentorships, preventative care kinds of services, education, financial literacy, legal counsel, emergency assistance if they're in situations where they're in crisis, being able to be gainfully employed, successfully employed, sustain employment, be able to learn crisis management and navigate the trauma that they're experiencing, because again, people are actively dealing with issues that are not addressed in prison. And so when I come out, I'm still dealing with these things. So I'm looking for someone to be able to support me, help me, and whatever that person may look like or whatever I need to do to be able to make ends meet, which is how we get in situations where we're with abusive partners again, where we're in abusive situations with family members again, being able to learn how to have boundaries, being able to understand body autonomy, having creativity nurtured, being able to have an identity that is not one that is linked to being incarcerated, having purposeful activity, relationship coaching, being able to pick healthy people, relationship sobriety, being able to address issues of codependency, being able to become, I think, involved in social action, right? So, advocating for other people, economic justice, abortion rights, reproductive rights, fighting racism, fighting bigotry, fighting all the stigma associated with incarceration, equality for our LGBTQIA plus people, ending violence against women, constitutional equality, right? So there are just a lot of different ways to advocate and learn. If you want to know more, there are a lot of organizations, but a few I'll give to you as a place to start. Free Hearts, Women's Prison Association. Here locally, we have New Life, Second Chance. It is so very important that women who are currently incarcerated or formerly incarcerated recognize, and we also recognize, that they deserve to be safe. And I think until we truly address equality, whether someone is incarcerated or not, access to appropriate health care, access to being able to learn from mistakes and be able to get the resources that weren't in place that may have led to mistakes. We have learned so much about women who have been incarcerated, severely punished for simply being involved in a relationship with someone who actually committed felonies, murder, and that person, that man often got less time than they did. How many young people, there are so many stories of young women who lost so much of their lives because of the injustices in the legal system with regard to how women are treated. So I see you, sis. I hear you, sis. And I want you to know that your voice doesn't fall on deaf ears. And whether you are in a situation where you were incarcerated or you're currently incarcerated, we are advocating for you and we're working hard on this side to ensure when you come back out, you have places where you can go, that we're becoming educated and we can share resources. But also that we're teaching our young people how to respect. We've talked about women in this episode, but we know boundaries and respect are go across gender and gender nonconforming. So teaching people to be good human beings, to be respectful, to put people in loving spaces, to teach people skills like these are the things that you can do in your everyday life to show up for and prevent sexual assault and abuse. That we teach that there is only one type of consent, and that is enthusiastic consent. Anything else is a no. That we teach people to be able to hear rejection and accept that a person isn't interested and be able to move on and not respond with violence, not to coerce people, not to try to manipulate people, but also that we talk to our young males and our young females and our adult males and females and also our non-binary and trans populations, like getting on dating sites, how to be safe, how to protect yourself so you're not in situations where someone can take advantage of you. Unfortunately, we learned about a young woman went out on a date with a man who mutilated her body, like literally chopped her up. And we don't know what could potentially happen. So we want to put some things in place to try to be safe, letting people know where you are, who you're going on dates with, getting information about the person that you're dating, finding about resources so that you can be safe, so that you don't have to depend on another person to try to be safe who's going to pimp you out for sex or who is going to require you to do demeaning things, who's going to be violent to you. Being able to know about spaces such as Goodwill that can help you with career skills, places that can get you financial counseling, places that can help set you up so that you can get your basic needs met. And this may be collaborative efforts. We may be working with churches and other organizations, but I think it's important that we all know about resources. So when someone comes to us or we see someone struggling or someone who has the potential to be in a place where they could be assaulted and abused because they're in that place of desperation. And I think sometimes we forget about what it's like to be in a place of not having. And so it's often easy for us to overlook people that don't have. Oh, you did something to create that situation, not recognizing all of the different layers that lead people to be in those kind of positions. So for you, sis, that's incarcerated or is formerly incarcerated, there's hope. But also for us on the other side, like we also have hope to show up and be better, loving, kind people and teach the kind of skills that we want to have to be preventative so that we have less people who are violating people's boundaries and being abusive in spaces. Okay, be well.